Alright, just get back from seeing this film, preparing to review it. I just gotta... Hey. I know you're there. You can't be here. I gotta... What is up, everybody? RandomRandomMan here, bringing you my review for the 2020 version of The Invisible Man. Acting as a contemporary adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel of the same name and a reboot of the Invisible Man film series, the plot of this sci-fi horror film basically follows a woman played by Elizabeth Moss who believes she's being haunted by her abusive partner, played by Oliver Jackson Cohen, despite him having apparently died. Going into this movie, I wasn't the most excited to see it at first. Now, when I first saw the trailer for this film, it looked like some generic mainstream horror film that I wasn't going to be into until I saw that this was a reboot of The Invisible Man. Now, I've never read the original source material that this film is a contemporary adaptation of, though I am aware of H.G. Wells' other famous works, like The War of the Worlds, which has seen multiple adaptations across different mediums in the last century. But I did see the 1933 Invisible Man film in preparation for this latest reimagining, and I do see why it's considered to be a cinematic classic. It does have what I think to be over-the-top acting at times, but the visual effects for this movie being over 85 years old, I think hold up well today, and it tells a cautionary tale both about the fascination and tragedy of what the power of our title character possesses. And with what this latest movie was going to do, it tips the scales pretty clearly in it not necessarily having the Invisible Man be the main character. Instead, it's a modern telling where he is still the villain of sorts, but it has us following a woman. This brings me right into talking about the cast and their performances, starting out with our main character, Cecilia, played by Elizabeth Moss. She's the main reason I wanted to see this film, on top of the surprisingly positive reviews that this film has mostly received. Now, I think Moss as an actress is a true talent, despite me never having seen any of the award-winning television work she has done between the past decade or so with Mad Men or The Handmaid's Tale. But I have seen some films of hers, and I thought she did some great work in movies such as The One I Love, opposite Mark Duplass, and even last year with a pretty standout supporting role in Jordan Peele's Us. And this is coincidentally another horror film, and with The Invisible Man being a similar territory to what she did last year, but with her being at the forefront of it all, she really gives a commanding performance. She is basically in almost every scene, if not every single sequence of this film, to where she is either acting by herself because she is confronted with what she thinks is an invisible composition of her abusive ex-boyfriend. She also effectively sells the raw emotional vulnerability of someone who's gone through such a manipulative and toxic relationship that she desperately wanted to get out of, but she is still being followed around by what she thinks is her ex-boyfriend really coming back to bring her into some more peril. Also standing out is Oliver Jackson Cohen as Cecilia's abusive partner, Adrian, / our title Invisible Man. Now, we don't get to see much of him, obviously from the title of this film, but what we do and don't see for the most part of Jackson Cohen's performance got across that he is bad news. We only hear him in minimal bursts of dialogue, and with the few screen time where we do actually get to see him without being invisible, he still looks like a very imposing presence. We also get other nice supporting work from Aldous Hodge, who plays a detective and childhood friend of Cecilia, who is letting Cecilia stay with him and his daughter, played by Storm Reed, also doing a nice job here for what little she has to do. And the last two shout-outs I want to give are to Harriet Dyer as Cecilia's sister and Michael Dorman as the ambiguous brother of Adrian, who is also the lawyer and go-between for Cecilia and what his brother has left to Cecilia despite all that ensues. Everyone here does an exceptional job, but of course, the biggest props we have to give is to Elizabeth Moss as her main character Cecilia, as she is literally a one-woman show for the overwhelming majority of it. The writing of this film, and by extension the directing by Leigh Whannell, take a concept that has been done decades ago, but modernizes it to a very fitting degree for what this film is about from the get-go. If you've seen the classic 1933 Invisible Man film, then you know that the title character is a part of the classic slate of Universal monsters from that very iconic era of filmmaking, to where recently we've had attempts to try to bring that franchise back into the modern day with failed results, to say the least. We had Dracula Untold back in 2014, starring Luke Evans as our title character, and even more recently in 2017, The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. I've not seen either of those films, but it seems like I wasn't missing much either way with what I implied earlier. I've also not seen Whannell's previous directorial effort, Upgrade, despite hearing very fun things about it. So I went into his Invisible Man film with just the idea of seeing it as its own film, while having seen the 1933 classic. What I can say from how this movie gets its setup and carries across its running time is that it goes back down to a very grounded and tangible level compared to the two big budgeted attempts to bring the Universal monsters into our current era of film. The way the movie begins has our main character Cecilia escaping from her abusive boyfriend's really big compound of a mansion and staying with her aforementioned childhood friend. And then we find out that he, 2 weeks later, had committed suicide. Naturally, Cecilia is spooked by that, as one would be, despite one feeling as if they should be relieved that their abuser is no longer around in this world. But that's not how it goes, of course, in this film, as Cecilia believes that she is still being terrorized by her former lover. What Whannell does on paper is create a very dastardly feeling of distress with not just our main character Cecilia, but the way the movie is also directed, in focusing on some shots of emptiness or just still life within the inside of Hodges' character's house, or just any area that we see Masa Cecilia walking around in, as we know that there is someone there going after Cecilia. That makes it both fitting as a horror film in setting up the atmosphere and as a modernization of the Invisible Man story, as, like I mentioned before, the story is turned on its head of sorts, with the focus being on an abused woman who is still being terrorized around by her abuser, but she can't see him. This also brings to mind the thematic thrills that the movie brings throughout its about 2-hour running time, as it has a lot of talking points with it going through what it's like to be in an abusive relationship, but it's continuing even after the abuser is apparently out of the picture, as this is also a sci-fi horror film, and it does try to explain what is really going on, but without giving any spoilers away, it goes into it with such a gradual and revelatory kind of execution. It's thoroughly entertaining throughout, and this is due in part to some of the technical merits, with this film being notably made for about $7 million, which is commonplace for movies produced by Blumhouse Productions like this one is. I already mentioned Jordan Peele earlier with his movie Us, but also with his directorial debut, Get Out. That was also produced by Blumhouse and was similarly made for around $5 million, which is crazy with what this movie ran with in how visually striking it is. That also applies with The Invisible Man, and with the actual powers of invisibility being used and being done pretty resourcefully. It was done to a degree where it was believable, though with the movie being low budgeted, as I already mentioned, it is kind of dodgy at times, but I can let that slide because what the movie does is already above and beyond with how it is thematically. But going back into the look of this film, the movie is well shot cinematography-wise and gets across a very dark gloom and loom feel, not just because it's a horror film, but because most of the movie takes place at night. I also felt that with the way the camera was moving to a very stable degree, it helped out in getting us to view some of the action. It was all strung together to efficient editing and also with the sound design. Now, given how it's a horror film, there are certain moments where jump scares are used and the sound is amped up to get our senses, going, ugh, to where we are feeling a genuine reaction. But I think that this movie uses it to not a baity degree, but to a fitting one, given how we can't see a lot of what hits Cecilia in the film, and to where the score aids it with the tension and tenacity. Benjamin Wallfish composed the score for this film, and what he has done in the past with other notably overbearing scores has carried over into the movie to a seamless degree, I feel. It's one of those kind of scores that is not obnoxious, but it does effectively get us in the mindset to where, something dreadful is going to happen, or we know that the Invisible Man is going to come at any given moment. It all ran along at about 2 hours, which, as I mentioned before, had me thoroughly entertained by it, though the way this movie does run along, especially towards the end, does segue into the one issue I have with this film. Now, as it does go along, the way this movie is clever in revealing itself and just how it progresses had me so into it, more than I usually would for any other horror film, because I've mentioned this time and time again before, horror is my least favorite genre, but I do love me an engaging horror film. So when I felt like this movie was gonna end at a specific moment, the movie kept going. And it's not like I was anxious to leave or anything and I was checking my phone for the time. No, I didn't do any of that because I was already so into what was happening with the film. But the movie continued for about another 20 minutes or so by my estimation, and it went into a sequence that I wasn't entirely sure what to make of. Then the movie does end, and it really had me thinking, could the movie have ended earlier like I initially wanted it to? Or was it right that it ended this way? This is definitely going to be a big talking point for anyone who sees this film. I already expect a bunch of debates and discourse to be had with what does happen by this movie's conclusion, but that's what I love to see with any kind of movie, especially with one like this one that is so topical and relates to our modern day and age. But the movie is definitely going to be considered divisive in the way it ends by some estimation and the implications of what the story is trying to tell. But that makes the movie more worth watching, as I've already backed up with my many other positives I had with it, because I really enjoyed The Invisible Man. This is a rare remake, reimagining, reboot, whatever, of a classic story that I feel not only stands toe-to-toe with it, but I'm going to go as far as to say as improves on it and really does fit with the modern setting that we have, not just in Hollywood, but with society today, because of what I've already mentioned with the themes, the commentary of abuse, anything like that. This movie already is saying so much while also really having us in with the sci-fi horror concept that it does present. It's a movie that really surprised me on so many levels, and I cannot wait to see what many think of it, especially with the ending and how it's a film that could kickstart the modern-day Universal monster movie franchise to where we get smaller and more grounded monster films based on the various iconic characters, and I, for one, welcome that. But for now, and looking at this movie on its own, I think it is an ingenious instant classic. I definitely recommend it. My final verdict for The Invisible Man is 4 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of The Invisible Man. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.